everybody. Are you enjoying the Topo Chico? You know, there's a panel on Topo Chico. For some of us, like the idea that the hottest, deepest waters from Mexico is mind-blowing, right? That, to me, that says anything. It's sort of like how to change your mind about something we thought we knew. I'm Erin Trapp, the director of the Biennial Americas, and I'm a little out of breath from introducing the Clínica downstairs, so sorry about that. But couldn't be more excited to be here to introduce the Clínica on mobility and access efforts. You know, it's funny, we take folks around the hemisphere from Colorado and the United States to experience what doing business, what life is like in other communities. And some of the people you're going to hear from today are from places like Brazil, Colombia, where traffic is murderous, might be a word that you want to use. Like, it's really challenging. And so people say, "Hi, you're bringing experts from these places to talk about accessibility. What do we have to learn from them?" Well, we share problems, we share heritage, we share solutions, right? And there's so much innovation in the places that we visit. Always come back inspired. And the inspiration comes from every level. It comes from our meetings with high-elected officials. It comes from meeting with people in the streets. There's just nothing like getting to be there in person, right? So we're so thrilled to bring you this discussion of mobility and access today because it really is around equity. And we built that conversation off of what we've learned in those places. So I think today is going to be a really phenomenal discussion with city planners and policymakers about how we really can catalyze mobility and drive solutions to the people who need them. So really grateful to everybody who's helped us put this together. I know that there are some committee members who helped build today's panel. If you're on the committee, will you raise and be acknowledged? Everybody give a hand for these folks. These folks I also want to mention, we couldn't do this without the support of so many sponsors, and this particular session is sponsored by the Denver Office of Economic Development and Opportunity, newly renamed DADO. Did I say that right? DADO, thank you. I'm getting there. And on behalf of the city, I'd like to bring up Louis Klecki to say a few words.
Well, thank you for that introduction and invitation to give some opening remarks here at this particular Clínica.
Got it.
Right? Which is the turning off the ignition discussion on mobility and access and equity. So I almost had a mobility issue right there from stepping up because I had bad knees from being a former athlete. So I can definitely appreciate making sure that we have all of our infrastructure set up in a manner that no matter whose ability that runs across that infrastructure can be able to move around. So I'm Louis Klecki. I'm the Executive Director of Denver Public Works, and I'm definitely proud to represent the city for this session, being one of the sponsors of the event. And I want to spend the time to today learn from a lot of the different voices here, not only in the panel, but perhaps in the crowd, about ways in which we can build more equitable cities. So very excited to be here, and very excited that this is actual topic as a part of this particular event this year. And so I've been at the Public Works Department for almost 2 years. I came in at the end of 2017. We have a burgeoning city, as you know, here in Denver. We've added over 100,000 more residents to the city and county of Denver over the past 7 years. And with more people and more jobs comes more impact to our transportation system. And so we're trying to figure out ways to make sure that we include equity into everything that we do. Now, equity and transportation equity is traditionally a planning term. A lot of times it's used in the terms of making sure that you have a balanced network that accommodates all modes. But for the department that I run, where I have a cadre of engineers and planners and 2/3 of my staff and actual operational folks, it is important that we kind of simplify what equity means. And so for our department, we've really been working on a clear-cut definition of what really equity is about. And equity is really based in justice, and justice is about identifying a remedy for some type of wrongdoing that has happened in the past. And so in order for our department, who are responsible for making sure we build out all of our infrastructure, we fundamentally want to make sure that the people, the areas, and the assets in Denver that need the most help receive the most attention. That's the fundamental thing that we have that undergirds all of our equity work in the mobility space. And so we all know that transportation has been one of the factors that, one, can not only connect people and provide access for folks, but over the decades, especially in this country, it's been used to separate and divide communities. And we are embarking on a different approach here as the heads of the leadership of the mayor, as well as our department, to make sure that as we move forward with new projects, that we are considering everybody in those impacted areas. And regardless of the mode that you choose to be able to get around, you should be able to do so in an efficient and safe and reliable manner. And that's what we're going to focus on. And we're excited to hear from the panelists today and making sure that we learned something today. And we take that back as public servants and make sure that we implement those types of ideas and make our city better. And you may be able to hear something today as you go back to your locales that you can implement and make your locations much better. The last thing I would like to mention, although we're very focused on making sure our mobility infrastructure meets the needs of everybody, regardless of age, from 8 to 80, so regardless of how well you get around, regardless of your income status, we want to make sure that our infrastructure is built out to make it a safe environment for people to be able to get around. So just to give you some statistics of what we're doing here in Denver around safety, and what we have here in Denver is a adopted plan back in 2017 called Vision Zero, which is trying to drive down the number of traffic deaths to zero by the year 2030. And right now, we have experienced 58 people who have died in our city streets. Last year, all of 2018, we had 64. We have 4 months left, and we are almost at the same amount that we had in all of last year. And so as we move forward in building out an equitable city, keep in mind that we need to do it in a manner that protects all of our vulnerable users. And in Denver, 5% of our roadways contribute to about 40% of the fatalities, and many of those fatalities are on roadways that we consider high-injury network roads, which, if you look at a map, it borders all of the underserved areas in our city. And so equity and understanding what it means is extremely important. Tying it back to how you build out your infrastructure and make sure people be able to get around in an efficient manner is important. The most important thing, the number one priority for our city, as well as our departments, is to make sure people are operating safely. So I really appreciate the opportunity to provide some remarks, give some context to the city and county of Denver, and I'm looking forward to the remarks of the panel. And all of the other conversations that are going on as a part of this particular event. So thank you very much.
Much for that context. And, you know, everybody, I hope that by now knows that the theme of this year's festival is empathy in action. And we specifically picked action because we think that empathy is so obviously something that we need to work on today, but we really want to lean toward action. So those contextualizing comments were extremely helpful. And what we are asking of all of you today is, once we've had a chance to hear from the panelists, maybe during the Q&A session, think about what that means in our community. Like, what is this information that we're learning today? How can we implement it? How can we make those suggestions to public works? Or we could have a whole session on the scooters alone, right? But we'd really love it if you help us lean toward action and make those comments, suggestions, and make sure that this information does not go to waste, because that's really what we're hoping that when you will come out, you will get out of the biennial today. So we are deputizing all of you along with your host for today, who I'm going to turn it over to now. To my left is Eugene Howard from the Denver Office of Community Planning and Development, and he's going to be our moderator today. Thank you for coming.
All right, thank you. So maybe that is very helpful. Let's see if this will stay. So Clínica number 4, yes, welcome, and thank you for coming and joining us today. As you've already heard, my name is Eugene Howard. I'm a senior city planner with Community Planning and Development, and I will be moderating this fantastic panel. We have some amazing guests joining us today with all sorts of national, international experience and a depth and breadth of knowledge they're going to share with us today. So I think that there are opportunities for us to come away with a great deal of new information, new ideas, and ways to get out there and motivate our elected officials into action. So I'm really excited to introduce our panel. I'm going to very quickly give you sort of some brief highlights of each individual that's here joining us today. I will ask if you wouldn't mind holding your applause until we get through the introductions, and then we will turn it over to them to share with us a little bit more about themselves and the current work that they're doing. So, I'm going to start with my immediate left, and pardon my pronunciations if I don't quite get it right, but Clarice Biennial has been involved in planning and implementation of social policies and programs in Brazil since 2001. She has worked in her home country of Brazil. She's also worked in Mozambique and Namibia. Clarice is an educator, an avid promoter of women's rights, a supporter of environmental justice, and her efforts in transit and mobility has earned her numerous awards, too many to go into. So, welcome, Clarissa, and thank you for joining us. Next to Clarissa, we have Eline Calavante. We'll keep working on that. She's a journalist, a visionary, an international bicycle advocate, and it also happens to be the subject of an award-winning documentary, Bikes versus Cars. Eline is currently the public relations and founder of Climate Change and Active Mobility Coalition, the director of public participation in Ciclocidade, which is an urban cyclist association in Sao Paulo. And, on top of everything else, she is the regional counselor at UCB, the Brazilian Union of Cyclists. So welcome, thank you for coming. All right, moving down the line, we have Sean Hertel. Sean is a Toronto-based urban planner with over 20 years of experience. He started at a very young age. He's also a lecturer with Ryerson University and the University of Waterloo. Sean brings a breadth of experience from many disciplines, including regional municipal planning, development, transportation, housing, journalism, and social equity. He has a multitude of letters after his last name. And one little tidbit, according to a Canadian website that is monitored and provides information on lecturers by students, Sean has a 4.4 rating for his lecture. And at the end there, we've got Robin Mazumder. Robin is a thought leader, a spokesperson for the work that we're going to talk about today, an advocate, a change maker, and a future doctor of cognitive neuroscience that he's seeking from the University of Waterloo. Robin has been studying the psychological impacts of our built environment, using a multitude of tools, but most recently virtual reality and wearable technology. His inspiration, as I understand it, comes from his experience working as a mental health occupational therapist. He has numerous articles and interviews and publications to his name, and he has a great deal of research that he'll be sharing with us today. So with that, I ask you all to give a warm, fantastic Biennial of the Americas welcome to our panelists. So in our preparation for today, we thought it would be a good idea to make sure that we were all on the same page with two key definitions related to mobility and the definitions of equity. So consulting the Merriam-Webster dictionary, mobility is defined as the quality or state of being mobile or movable, the ability to change one's social or socioeconomic position in a community, and especially to improve that condition. And I think it's that last part of that definition that is really important to the conversations that we will have today, and for each of us to think about as we go back into our lives, looking for opportunities to affect meaningful change. The definition of equity is justice according to natural law or right. Specifically, and I think this is key, the freedom from bias and the freedom of favoritism. And what I think is important about that is really when we look at our built environment, there are decisions that have been made for each and every one of us, whether we would have made those decisions or not. So what are we favoring in our built environment? What are we favoring when it comes to transportation and land use? And how might we work to make all of those decisions more equitable to more people? So, With that, I want to start us off with my very first question. And for our panel, I wanted to make sure to share with you that Denver and the region has started to really have more intentional conversations around equity. And what does it mean to really embed equity in the work that we do as city officials? So, thinking about how equity is showing up in our plans and policies, please, if you don't mind, in order here, tell us a little bit about what equity means to you and the countries where you work and the work that you're doing. So please.
Yes. Well, okay, thank you. I don't know if we can go to the slides? Should I go here with the clicker?
I can do it too if you like.
I will have to pass, I think. Should I do that? Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, so I think it's going to be easy here if I just show some images and then I can answer this. I think, first of all, thank you very much for being here, for inviting me. It's interesting to be here in a panel with another Brazilian and with a person that I respect a lot, with two Canadians and with an American in Denver, which, by the way, is an amazing city. But I think it just brings something that is important for me to say, which is don't take for granted that reality is the same everywhere. So I think this is very important because this, in many cases in Brazil, is the reality of our mobility and of the way that people move, right? And we are talking about this. Although most of you would know Rio de Janeiro, the South Zone, Ipanema, Copacabana, that's not where the majority of the population lives. And sometimes we have this reality even very close to these areas. So I think this is the first point, is that equity means very different things depending on your reality. And here in terms of mobility and connecting mobility to equity, I like to understand mobility as a lever of access. I think Amartya Sen did that very well in a way of explaining to us how we can have different levers that really help us flourish in our society as a community or as individuals. Right? So I understand mobility as being a lever for us to access service, employment, education, health, participation as well. But again, it will depend on who you are, in which society you are, and what are really the parameters in the society that qualify you. And in the Brazilian case, there are many different parameters, and I think here it would be the same, like your income, your gender, but I would say up and like above all, race. So we talk very little about that in Brazil, about our racial inequality, but this is really one of the main, I would say, parameters that defines your access to the city and that defines what in fact you are entitled to access. And mobility can be a lever for empowerment and a lever for access, but it can also be something that perpetuates inequality. I think this is very clear for us. When you're talking about cities that are spatially segregated, right, that we define who has a priority, where we define that the priority for the government until now is much more about protecting property rather than protecting our rights to move in the city. So I think this photo is very meaningful in this way, right? We put people on the street because we are protecting the building, we are protecting the cars. And when we see that, in fact, our city has been growing, still maintaining a lot of inequity in the social, spatial inequality. So here's the map of São Paulo, where Aline comes from. It's this dog. You see the white part, it's like a dog, a face of a dog. This is São Paulo. And the purple mark, the purple heat mark, I don't know how to say that in English, is where employment is, formal employment. And the yellow and the green, the yellow and red dots are where the lower income population lives. So we see that there is a very serious spatial mismatch here, and that mobility can either improve it or it can perpetuate this inequality, this difficult to access work, and maybe for us to say the best mobility plan is in fact a land use plan, because there is no mobility solution that can really address this problem, right? He's still demanding a lot on the population. And here, just another example as well. This is Rio, and you see 3 maps of Rio, and you see the time to access employment, so the amount of employment that is available to you. In 30 minutes, you see the black map, almost nothing. In 60 minutes, you can already see something here, which is in the city center and south zone, the areas you know about Rio, and in 90 minutes. So if you look at the extreme west zone, this is where 27% of the population live. Not even in 90 minutes, they can access a decent amount of work with public transport. So we're talking about extremely serious, and if we look at this population, this is another map of Rio, which more or less tells you the same story, the transit sheds, so the coverage of public transport system, right? If we look at per income brackets, 23% of the low-income population is covered, but 55% of the higher-income population. So we are delivering, even when we're delivering infrastructure, we are not really managing to analyze per income where the population is, what sort of access they need. And when we have been trying to put these maps in terms of gender and race as well. So I don't have the map here, but I can tell you 55% of the high-income population has access, but only 32% of black women. So, when you go down, putting all these different layers, you can see who is in fact more distant and have less access. I also want to bring here just a discussion about the bus system, which even in the cities where we have big rail system, most of the population is in fact in the bus. We don't have any city in Brazil that has more than 5% of the streets, of the roads with priority to bus. So this is also another aspect of equity that I think we need to discuss, right? Especially if we want to get people out of cars. How do we qualify the public transport system in all its different services, and I think speed is one. And there is another, almost coming to the end here, about equity, but here when we start understanding what are the different realities that different groups experience in transport. So we have this recent survey now in Brazil that showed 97% of women have been harassed already on public transport, even on taxis and Ubers and other services like that. So also, how much are we demanding from a woman who has to be 2 hours in a bus to access work in a place where she's very likely to be harassed? So this is also about justice, and I think above all it's about empathy, because we think planning transport is neutral in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of income, but we need to understand what are really the inequities in the country, in the Brazilian country, and I suppose in the US as well. This is a graph that is very, it belongs to most of our countries, right? My experience as a white woman, I'm a woman, I have an experience different from a man, but it's most likely more similar to an experience of a white man than of experience of a black woman in Brazil. So I think empathy is also a lot about bringing all these different voices to the table and give visibility as much as possible to the experience that all these different groups experience and face daily in their difficulty to access the city and to access all the wonderful opportunities that the city in theory have to offer, but that we don't really offer to all equally. So I guess this is a very long answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Boa tarde, todas e a todos. Vou dar um tempinho para vocês ligarem o tradutor. Boa tarde. Muito obrigada pelo convite ao evento da Bienal das Américas. Estou muito feliz de estar aqui hoje. Vou falar em português porque eu me sinto mais confortável para trazer toda a complexidade que o tema exige. Então, a sua pergunta sobre o que é equidade. Foi muito bom ouvir a Clarice falar um pouquinho do Brasil no começo, porque eu vou focar meus esforços na política cicloviária da cidade de São Paulo. São Paulo é uma cidade que tem cerca de 11 milhões de habitantes, só na capital. Então a gente está falando de uma mega cidade. E com todas as questões urbanas de moradia, gentrificação, que nós também passamos muito por isso, desigualdade social, o transporte ele se torna um tema de profunda de manifestação da profunda desigualdade social que a gente vive. Então, é no tema dos transportes que a gente vê refletida a desigualdade social na rua, no acesso das pessoas às cidades e as oportunidades que a cidade oferece. Então, a gente tem hoje no Brasil cidades que oferecem diferentes oportunidades para diferentes pessoas. As pessoas elas não recebem todas a mesma chance de sobreviver e de viver dignamente. Quando a gente começou a trabalhar com a bicicleta de uma forma mais estruturada, mais política, há mais ou menos 10 anos atrás, a gente não esperava, muito porque éramos um movimento jovem na cidade de São Paulo, mas também por falta de experiência, a gente não imaginava que as ciclovias e ciclofaixas fossem ser um exemplo de uma política pública de inclusão social. Quando a gente começou o trabalho com as bicicletas, com as ciclovias, a gente só queria chegar vivo em casa. A gente só queria ter um pouco de espaço urbano para ter o direito de ir e vir. E durante alguns anos o nosso movimento ele foi conhecido como um movimento elitizado, um movimento que surge de uma classe média e que exige o direito de pedalar como se fosse algo quase chique, porque a experiência que a gente tem aqui na Europa, Estados Unidos, quem usa bicicleta é quem mora muito perto do trabalho e é privilegiado. Nos países do sul global, da América Latina, a gente tem uma outra realidade. A bicicleta está muito conectada com a classe pobre, porque é um veículo barato. Então, estima-se que o Brasil tem 70 milhões de bicicletas. Mas essas bicicletas elas estão cada vez mais marginalizadas por políticas públicas de rodoviarização do país. Então, as cidades menores, as pequenas e as médias cidades hoje sofrem com intensas políticas de incentivo ao uso do carro e de motos. Então, você vê cidades pequenas que têm muito uso de bicicleta no Brasil hoje migrando para moto. E voltando para São Paulo, quando a gente começou a trabalhar com o tema da bicicleta, a gente fez reuniões em todas as subprefeituras, que são como prefeituras regionais. A cidade de São Paulo tem 32 subprefeituras, é como se fossem 32 pequenas cidades em São Paulo. Fizemos reuniões em todas elas para tentar mapear o uso da bicicleta e os interesses de quem usava a bicicleta nessas regiões. Descobrimos que tem subprefeitura que o uso da bicicleta é equiparado ao uso da Europa, de cidades europeias. Existe uma periferia da cidade de São Paulo, chamada Jardim Helena, que as pessoas usam mais bicicleta do que em Amsterdã. Mas elas não têm a mesma segurança, elas não têm a mesma visibilidade, elas não têm o mesmo respeito do que em Amsterdã. Então, quando a gente percebeu que implementar a infraestrutura cicloviária ela exige coragem política, porque não é técnico o problema. A gente tem muitos dados, muitos números que demonstram o papel da bicicleta na matriz de mobilidade, mas a gente muitas vezes não tem políticos interessados nessa agenda. Então, o último prefeito da cidade de São Paulo conseguiu implementar 400 quilômetros de infraestrutura cicloviária, majoritariamente na região central de São Paulo, que é uma região mais rica, onde está a classe média, poucas estruturas na periferia, que curiosamente é onde tem mais uso de bicicleta. E o efeito disso foi avassalador para a cidade inteira. Hoje as ciclovias elas não são só para ciclistas, a gente tem leis que autorizam catadores de material reciclado a usarem ciclovias, cadeirantes, skatistas e pedestres. Então são espaços de cidadania, eu diria. E sempre que eu mostro essas fotos dos eventos onde eu participo, uma vez na Europa me falaram, olha, aqui também as pessoas usam a ciclovia para cadeira de rodas ou para caminhar. Mas a grande diferença é que a gente não tem calçada. As pessoas fazem isso porque não tem outro espaço para se deslocar. Então, as ciclovias acabaram se tornando quase o único espaço onde é possível acessar a cidade, as oportunidades da cidade sem ter um carro. Porque a cidade ela foi feita para quem tem carro. 80% do espaço viário é dedicado para quem tem carro. E quem tem carro em São Paulo é 30% da população. Então a gente tem hoje 30% da população ocupando 80% do viário. Os outros 20% a gente divide entre transporte coletivo, calçadas e ciclovias. Então, para passar para os próximos, eu acho que o que eu queria falar sobre a equidade é que para mim, para a gente no movimento da bicicleta em São Paulo, ficou muito conectado com justiça. Com justiça, com democracia, com acessibilidade, com oportunidades. Então, o que era para ser uma política pública de inclusão de ciclistas na matriz de transporte da cidade, se tornou uma política pública de inclusão social. E talvez esse seja o motivo pelo qual ela não tem avançado mais. O prefeito atual está há 3 anos na gestão e ele não avança com essa política, porque setores ricos não querem ter pobres na frente das suas casas, na frente dos seus trabalhos. Então, mais do que uma questão de mobilidade, é uma questão social, que envolve preconceitos e que envolve aí outras questões que não são só técnicas. Então, para começar, acho que é um pouco isso. Obrigada mais uma vez.
Sounds pretty familiar, some of those things. Before we go on to hear from Sean, I want to just remind our audience and anyone listening online that this session is being streamed live on Facebook Live. So the Biennial is the page, so please share that, like it, make sure that many of us that are not able to be here today are able to join and participate in this conversation. So thank you both very much for sharing, and we're going to hear from Sean.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. I don't have many slides. My students always groan when I say that, because that means they have to listen to me. So I think that 4.4 rating was a surprise to me, so that's great. I just wanted to remind myself, and sometimes it's good to remind ourselves, that the modern civil rights movement in North America began on a public transit bus over 60 years ago, with Rosa Parks refusing, because of the color of her skin, to sit at the back of the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And I think that sort of the fact that it happened on transit is very provocative and should mean something. And I think maybe we need to remind ourselves of the power, both positive and negative, about public transit. Because two things. I think public transit is a public good. It should be, not just transportation, it's infrastructure, but it's infrastructure inherently for the public good. And also I think it engenders, it focuses us, compels us, I think, to ask the question, who is the public in public transit? And I think that we sort of oversimplify, and I don't think we mean to. I think we're all generally well-intended. Even I have to catch myself as an academic studying transportation and transportation planning, and as a practitioner, I think it should almost say public transit, although it would sound a little awkward. But I think we have to understand that we may not be planning for the same public we think we are. Because we think that, the public is the public. Well, in Toronto, for example, where I come from,
You know, Toronto is heralded as this great shiny city on a hill for our diversity, but we do a lot wrong, and we have a lot of problems that, you know, Sao Paulo and Rio and Denver are grappling with, and other cities, because I think that wealth and race could still be, despite our best intentions, predictors of the quality and the level of service of our public transit. So unfortunately, in Toronto, you can see, this is done by the brilliant demographer David Olshansky from the University of Toronto. You can see that, you see our best transit spine, north, south, east, west. That's our transit, our subway system. In the blue is the highest income groups, and the red is the lowest income groups. So guess what, ladies and gentlemen, surprise, the highest income groups are clustered around the highest order transit, and the lowest income groups are in what Richard Florida at the Rodman Institute at UT calls transit deserts. So again, you can almost predict, based on race, based on income, even in a place like Toronto, right, where the level of service is and how well you're serving, quote, the public, right? Because you have a rich public who, ironically, doesn't often take transit, right? So who are we planning for, right? And then you have the poor, which planners ostensibly say that, well, we want to provide them with options. We want to provide captive riders with dignity and with mobility and predictability, so that they aren't second and third class citizens, like in many places, especially in the global south. But that's not what's happening. So that's all I wanted to show you, but I just want to say how I came. I've always liked to think of myself as a good person, as a good lefty, as someone who's kind of a bleeding heart, hugging person. But I'll tell you, I didn't come to empathy easily. And there are two ways I kind of stumbled into it, and that's the crux of, I think, the issue that we have to talk about. Is that despite me thinking I'm a good person and will use my privilege wisely as an academic and as a practitioner, I realized that I wasn't even asking the right questions. Two things prompted the change. I did a lot of, still do a lot of subway planning, and I was called into a finance meeting at Metrolinx, which is Toronto's public transit agency at a regional level. And I was called into a business case analysis meeting for a new line that was about $5.5 billion Canadian, or $100,000 US, whatever. Dollars kind of bad these days. So thanks for laughing. I appreciate that. And we had tax, return on investment, number of development applications, the number of people we could move per hour. But one thing missing was social impact. And I'm thinking, if we build transit for any reason, shouldn't social impact be at the top of the list? And they looked at me like I said I enjoy the taste of baby meat or something ridiculous, right? That was very controversial, right? Well, what do you mean? They honestly didn't get it. And secondly, which is very profoundly personal to me, it was January 7th, 2014, I remember the day. It was 5:30 in the morning, very cold, stereotypical Toronto, Canada morning. It was about minus 35 Celsius, it's cold. And I was taking the bus to be interviewed on a radio show about what I thought the top 5 challenges were facing Toronto for the new year. And this bus was very silent in the snow and crept up, and I got on, and I felt like it was in a dream because there was a lot of moisture and condensation. The doors opened, and I walked in, and I couldn't get very far because the bus was absolutely packed. And it was packed with women, and women of color. And not only was I the only male, but I was the only white person on the bus. And I could just see it in their faces. It was 5:30 in the morning, and many of them probably got on that bus at least maybe an hour ago, coming from one of the red areas on the map, and the bus was picking me up in the blue area. And it really stuck in me. It really made this idea of equity, of fairness, and what the hell I was doing as a transportation planner. It made it very personal. And I'm glad I had that experience. Now the question is, what am I going to do with it? Right? What should we do with it? Now me, like a good, well-intentioned idiot, I continued on the bus to the subway, went downtown to the studio, and did I mention that experience? No, I didn't. Maybe I was still processing it. I don't know. I'm not trying to come up with excuses. But I did use that experience, and one last slide, I guess, quickly, is my colleagues and I at York University came up with this. We got a grant to study transit equity. It's something that should be deliberately planned for, deliberately appropriated from our scarce public investments in transit. And I dare say I do think it has made a bit of a difference in the way that we prioritize project planning in our investments in Toronto, but it's still a fight. And so we have to, and I urge all of us to remind ourselves who are publicans, who are we planning for, who has power and who needs it, right? Who has power, who has influence. And I think the more that we think of people, faces, moving through spaces, the more we humanize the experience, the more real it will be. So they're just not a color on a map, literally and figuratively. They're people. There are people, there are brothers and sisters. And if we can make that a very intimate connection, then I think that we can do some good. But part of it is just asking the right questions in the first place. Thank you.
All right, okay, so the question was, what is equity? Okay.
Yeah, what does it mean in the work that you do?
Okay, I'll give some context for that. So, I mean, fundamentally, I think equity is about people having the opportunity and the resources to participate in things that are meaningful to them. And I think that would go the same for mobility for me too. So the definition for both those things would be around people being able to have some choice to engage in activities, communities that provide meaning to their life. And the way that I came to understand equity from that perspective was informed by my clinical experience with me as a mental health occupational therapist. So I did that for about 5 years. And occupational therapists are, I guess, distinguished in the healthcare world, and that we pay particular attention to the environment. And so we use the social model of disability to understand illness. So whereas the medical model of disability will locate illness or dysfunction in a person and treat the person, the social model of disability sees disability as a product of a disabling environment. So we don't see disabled people, we see disabling environments. And using that kind of framework, we go out and work with people, all sorts of health issues, and I focus mostly on mental health. And so I worked in Toronto at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health on a schizophrenia inpatient unit, where I work with acutely psychotic people to get them from the inpatient unit back in the community. And oftentimes these people were living under the poverty line. There was all sorts of other intersectional aspects to their experience in the city. And then I moved to Edmonton, which is Canada's largest, most northern city. There's about 1.5 million people living there. I worked on a team there that was focused on helping people with challenging behaviors or complex needs. And this is a multi-system initiative where we had justice, we had mental health, we had Ministry for People with Disabilities, all coming together to work with this group of very high needs, or we call them frequent flyers, because they come in either to the jail or the hospital almost like every day, and it costs the system like a lot of money. And the way that the reason they're labeled as having challenging behaviors is that they got really physical with people. Oftentimes there were some language barriers or communication barriers, and so the way that they would communicate that their needs weren't being met, or that they assault their caregivers, paid or unpaid. And so I spent 2 years working on this team, and regardless of the laundry list of diagnoses that these people had, the most detrimental issue that I saw that they faced was loneliness. And there was one client I had that the psychiatrist recommended me to go work with him because he said, you know, you're the occupational therapist, you're focused on meaning. This guy might not have any meaning in his life because he tried killing himself yesterday. And I went to go see him, and being the occupational therapist with the environmental kind of perspective on health, you know, first I said, you know, why did you try to take your life? And he's like, I'm lonely, I don't have any friends. And so I said, okay, well, let's look at your community. Where can you find people for you to connect with? And typically people with developmental disabilities in Edmonton live in boarding homes where there's 5 or 6 people stuffed into a house. These homes are run by private organizations that exploit these people who have a consistent revenue of funding coming in for their accommodation. And they live on the fringe of the city, so not really the central areas. And so I went for a walk with him around his community, and I saw like very, very little opportunity for him to connect with people. There was no big public space. There was no rec centers, no libraries. Transit was terrible, and to get from where he was to the core by bike would just be like a suicide mission. You know, like it just wasn't safe. So I saw, I mean, I guess equity and mobility, or mobility particularly for this person, as the biggest inhibitor to his well-being, or the absence of opportunities to get out of his community, which probably from an urban design perspective should have been designed better. And that's actually what led me to quit my job. I just got burnt out by seeing this constantly. And then I spent a year running a startup accelerator, which I wasn't really trained to do. And in the process, I got part of the learning, or the training was to do a course in design thinking with the Stanford D School. And there they talked about empathy, and empathy being why it should be at the core of the design process, whether you're designing a product or an experience or a city, like empathize with the users. And I realized that people I spent 5 years working with weren't really empathized with when it came to what their needs were from what a city should provide them. And so that led me to quit that job and start my PhD in neuroscience, where I try to use metrics around understanding the first-person experience of the city. Anyways, that's a bit of like a context. I just want to provide the lens that I have on these issues, but again, I think equity is really about providing people with the opportunities and the choice to participate. I think I prefer equity over inclusion, because inclusion requires people to participate if they don't want to, and there's a power dynamic. But I think equity is about, hey, if you want to participate, here are the resources, and we want you to do the most.
Great, thank you. So we've heard a lot about empathy in the work that you all do. And there are a lot of loud voices that are trying to participate and direct the decisions that we make. So I would like to ask each of you to share with us how you go about advocating for the marginalized individuals in your communities, those with less power, less socioeconomic capital. So how do you go about being an advocate for those whose voices are not as strong?
Well, being a part of a technical organization, but that is always part of the debate, I think it's our obligation to try to make the needs very visible. So we have been working a lot with data recently, and with spatialized data. And it's something very obvious, right? When I show you some maps, you're like, okay, we have maps about issues from every city, but in reality, in the day-to-day planning process, I don't think the people there, the government, are really looking that much at maps that put together income and race and gender. At times, this is all considered very transportation planning is neutral, so it doesn't matter. It's the same for everybody. So I think we're trying to put data as much as possible. We have been working a lot with qualitative research, focus groups, and trying to really, bring stories that help with data, right? So try to understand what is the woman's travel pattern in comparison to men. So how does integration of modes impact women's trips, right? If you're talking about an integration that is not functional from a infrastructure perspective or physical perspective in a station or in terms of fare integration, I know it covers up to 2 hours or it covers 2 modes. Well, that might not be enough for a woman that needs to do multiple chain trips. So we try to bring a lot of data, we try to specialize data, make it very visible, but also bring a lot of qualitative data. I think we have tended as a society, like a technical society, to only look at quantitative data, and I think this is very risky, right? Because it tends to make it very neutral. So we try to put all of this together, but the point that I think we have failed a lot is, in fact, how we engage people in the discussion, right? We make the public hearings, which is like the business as usual activity for participation, and then very few people go, of course. So why? And we don't know how to engage people, we don't know how to hear people, and I think this is the most difficult measure that we haven't yet solved, but we have an obligation to try to engage, and I think there are many new approaches now with youth groups that, engage in grassroots, like Aline was saying, talking to people in every bar in São Paulo. I think we need to find different ways to give more capillarity to our issues and bring more people to the debate. And we need to be open to listen to them and not, just opening space for you to talk, but we're not that much interested. And we're going to do that only as a pro forma, which is very common as well. So we need to find different ways of engagement, and I don't know what would be a best practice for that. So far we have been working with data and maps. That has been already pretty challenging.
Thank you. Lina.
Bom, um pouco disso tem a ver com ir nas comunidades, conversar com as pessoas, conversar abertamente, ouvi-las. A gente tem alguns ativistas que estudam escuta ativa, uma escuta com empatia, porque nem sempre o que as pessoas estão dizendo é o que elas querem dizer, nem sempre o que elas estão pedindo é o que elas querem de verdade. A gente teve um caso em São Paulo de uma das comunidades que não queria ciclovia. Eles estavam pedindo para apagar a ciclovia, a própria comunidade local. E a gente foi descobrir por quê. Porque eles estavam querendo, na verdade, uma praça para as crianças. E a comunidade não entendia que o recurso que estava sendo utilizado naquela ciclovia não ia virar uma praça. Que os recursos, eles têm direcionamentos, eles são carimbados para temas e para ações específicas. Mas as pessoas, elas muitas vezes não entendem como funciona uma política pública, como funciona o orçamento público, especialmente em São Paulo, que o orçamento público é muito complexo, é muito grande, e é difícil acompanhar isso, mas a comunidade só queria uma praça, ela não queria uma ciclovia. E aí a gente, quando entendeu aquele pedido, fez uma ação de revitalização de uma praça e uma ciclovia na sequência. Feita pelo poder público. Então, eu sinto que a gente tem o desafio de ir nos locais, escutar as pessoas, mas também de aproveitar os espaços de privilégio que a gente tem, seja no poder público, na imprensa, nas empresas, para sempre colocar em pauta que existe muita desigualdade social e que a gente precisa ter cuidado com isso. Ainda que a gente não saiba qual a solução, que a gente não esqueça que esse problema existe. Ouvi agora sobre planejadores urbanos. Nós temos no Brasil, especialmente em São Paulo, planejadores urbanos que não andam a pé. O nosso prefeito de duas gestões atrás andava em São Paulo de helicóptero. Então, existe uma desconexão real entre a vida pública e a vida da decisão pública com a prática da maioria da população. E eu acho que é aí que está nosso desafio, de como que a gente conecta as tomadas de decisão, as pessoas que fazem leis e tomam decisões com as práticas da vida real da maior parte da população. Os nossos governantes não andam de ônibus. Eles não usam o sistema único de saúde. Eles não têm filhos na escola pública. Então, eu acho que o que está acontecendo hoje no Brasil é um movimento de renovação política muito grande, onde as pessoas da vida real precisam ocupar os espaços de decisão. Não dá para delegar isso para um setor ou para uma classe, porque senão a gente sente na rua a falta de priorização das políticas que envolvem o coletivo, né, a necessidade da população. É complexa, mas eu sinto que a gente precisa conversar mais com populações marginalizadas, carentes, pobres, periféricas, conversar, ouvir, mas também não esquecer delas, mesmo quando a gente não está nesses espaços. Sempre lembrar a máxima de que ninguém fica para trás. A gente tem que ter justiça urbana também, então ninguém fica para trás. Como colocar isso na nossa vida também?
Great, thank you. Sean and Robin?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really simple question, Eugene. Thanks. So for the next 97 minutes, I'd like to... I think the first thing about equity is to realize in its achievement, it just doesn't happen. It's one of those things that has to be purposeful, that has to be intentional. And to make equity possible, you have to define what it is, and it's not equality. And I think it's treating people appropriately. It's recognizing their speciality as people and what their needs are, and then you treat them with respect and dignity. So it's all about fairness. We made 24 recommendations in a report to the government a few years ago on how to address equity, and about a third of them related to public consultation. For example, if you're building a new transit line, you should not have the meeting at 3 in the afternoon downtown at City Hall. You should have it late in the evening where the actual, your quote-unquote public live. And a lot of the public are racialized, marginalized, lower income, that actually need the transit. And yet, consulting them is almost, an afterthought. So one of the recommendations was to identify who those public were, and to go into their schools, to go to their community centers, and to actually go to their bus stops and speak with them while they're waiting for the bus, and even ride with them on the bus and interview them, such as I did. And it's amazing the connection, that a little empathy, I'm pandering to the theme, but it's true. Right? And you gain insight, and then they gain a sense of, this white bureaucrat actually does care. Isn't that nice? Right? So I think that's part of it. It's both very simple and complex. Right? But first you have to understand this problem. Last thing I'll say is, I'm old enough to remember Reaganomics and Thatcherism in the early 80s. Trickle-down economics didn't happen. Trickle-down equity won't happen either. That has to be deliberate and intentional.
Thank you. Robin?
So it's about how we advocate for the marginalized.
Okay.
So I think my advocacy journey started as a healthcare professional and just being really angry at seeing what people were experiencing, people who were extremely marginalized, people of color, people with developmental disabilities, people with mental health issues, people living in poverty. And so I think a lot of the advocacy for me involves using my platform to share their stories, but also recognizing I think there's a bit of risk in telling other people's stories, and that's something, and I think that can be exploited and profited upon. And so on a really personal level, what I try to do, recognizing that I'm creating platforms, so I have to participate in the platform that I'm creating, is just to not take up too much space and allow other people to talk. And on a very practical level, some things that I've just been doing on my own is reaching out to people who are marginalized, who I think have a really interesting story to tell, who are articulate, and maybe help them get on stages like this, in a world of like speakers, there's like a usual cast of people that move around, and I think it's great, but I also think it's important to have people whose stories are being told there. So, I don't know, I think, a bit of it is using my platform, but also using that platform to give someone else an opportunity to say what I think is most important.
Great, thank you. We're going to take some questions from the audience here in a moment, so get your questions ready. I want to change gears slightly and talk about technology. There are technological advances taking place on a pretty regular basis that are disrupting transit and transportation. It feels like technology could offer a lot of new benefits, but I'm sure there are pitfalls that you all see with technology. So I'd like to ask you each, do you think technology will help deliver more equitable solutions and choice? And what should policymakers and planners be keeping an eye on? What are the things that we maybe aren't paying attention to because we're mesmerized by the shiny new object?
Okay, I think this is a great question. I think we were even talking about it during lunch. We see automation, electrification, the shared economy, we see all of it happening and all these trends, and we are mesmerized by that. It's really very sexy to talk about technology, but if we don't have a very clear intentional set of actions that aim at dealing with equity, I don't think technology is going to solve this problem, right? So I want to give a few examples about that's going on in Brazil. We have heard a lot about slum dwellers in the city of Rio. So the city of Rio, if you don't know it, we have many slums inside the city and outside as well. It's not only, I think this is quite different from São Paulo, where the periphery, the slums are more to the periphery. The city of Rio, no, it's very mixed. Okay? So these are still very areas that have lack infrastructure, right? But they are inside the city, they are somehow closer. They are born out of location to be close to opportunities. But if you are a slum dweller, you probably will be ranked very badly on Uber by the drivers, because the drivers don't want to get into that area, right? They will get into that, and you will start having that very bad rating, right? So the driver rates you, and you rate the driver. So how do we sort that out? It makes me think of one of the Black Mirror episodes, if you remember that. But that's it, we are being rated. Technology is helping us defining, right, who is worth and who is not. We have spent a lot of time recently in Brazilian cities, in some Brazilian cities like Rio, where I'm from, talking about the e-scooters. We were talking about e-scooters earlier. Great, wonderful solution, can be really great. But an e-scooter in Rio costs about $1 for 15 minutes. A person who came, and they are in very specific areas, in the city center, in the south zone. We say, okay, this is going to be for the last mile. This is where the destinations are, so it's not that we are not, the people who live in the periphery will use it because that's their destination. They're going to do the last mile. But these people, most of them, have already taken either a subway or a train and a bus. Fare is not completely integrated. They have already spent $2 one way to arrive to work. Are they going to spend $1 more? This is going to be $3 US, one trip. This is a lot, right? So, but this is the main business of the day. In everybody's agenda is to decide how we're going to regulate the e-scooters. Is it great to have e-scooters? It's great to have e-scooters. Is it going to sort the problem of mobility and equity in our city? No, it's not. We should regulate e-scooters, but we are really wasting a lot of time while we should be, in fact, thinking how we're going to sort the problem of 2 million people who enter the city of Rio daily, who spend all this amount of money to access work, most of them informal work, so they don't have their transportation costs covered by the employers. And the last point, which I think is also it has to do with the electrification agenda, and with an agenda that is it's becoming really trendy in the cities, and we need to understand how we're going to deal with that. It's a great agenda which has to do with mobility pricing. I think it's great if we start having low emission zones or no emission zones, and we start to revise the circulation of polluting vehicles. That's great, but the cost of an electric vehicle in Brazil, it's impossible to buy. It's really extremely much more expensive than a polluting vehicle. So if we start to delimitate the flow of people, the way people circulate, in a country where the circulation of specific groups has already been limited, right? Where we have the black community living more in the periphery, where a country that is extremely violent, a country where we are killing, in a city where we are killing lots of people daily now. I think many of you heard in the morning the presentation from Teresa that mentions, we have black kids being killed because there is a big intervention happening in our city. Now we're going to put into it another layer. Is this population gonna flow easily in the city? No, they're not gonna flow easily in the city. And we're putting it in the bill of because we don't want polluting vehicles. But the low-income population are not gonna be capable of having electric vehicles, and the low-income population does not have public transport with quality to circulate in the city. How are we gonna do that? So I think it is crucial for us to talk about climate change and having low emission cities, right? Low emission zones and cities in the wide aspect of it. But how does that define who circulates, in which area people circulate? So I think it's the right space debate that we have here, and that it tends to get very technical, and it tends to go in a way that will again perpetuate the inequalities that we have on the ground and give it a stamp that it is clean. And just a parenthesis, there is one city in Brazil, I'm not going to say the name of the city, but I can tell you after if you want. The low emission zone area they are creating in the city center is going to be called white area. Área branca, the white area. The Secretary of Transport said that in an event recently. Because of pollution in a country like Brazil. So that shocks me, and I think that tells a story, right? And I think it's crucial that we try to understand how is technology going to really help us deal with this problem, or do we want technology to help us make it clear who is valued in our society and who is not? So I'm not very fond of this.
Thank you. Other panelists? Technology. Fred or Phil?
I think both. I mean, as a neuroscientist, I'm really fascinated by neural nets and AI and deep learning. And I think, traditionally, a lot of cities, like transit networks, were built around privilege, giving people an easy way to get to places they want to go, or stop people from getting to where they are. Like in Washington, like in Georgetown, I was there a few months ago, and in DC, they didn't build a subway line out there because they didn't want certain people in there. Anyway, so I think what technology offers us is access to data, where the people are and where they need to go, and we can use sophisticated deep learning methods to really optimize a network that meets people's needs and understands what those frequencies are. But at the same time, we have to be conscious of the bias that's in data. There's a lot of talk right now about conscious big data bias in big data. And an interesting kind of example is I was talking to a transportation engineer conference, I can't remember which one, and they were getting really excited about using Strava data. So Strava, for people may not know, is like, I went for a run and a Facebook post about it, and share your bike ride or how fast you went or whatever. And typically, Imagine uses that kind of technology, and so this transportation engineer said that they were really excited that they were finally doing some data-driven planning, and they would use that to figure out where to put cycling infrastructure. And it's fascinating to me because a lot of these people are actually vehicular recreation cyclists, and the city was thinking we were developing infrastructure based on data provided by these people. And I'm like, go look around and who's using most bikes in the city. There are actually people living under the party line, visibly homeless. They don't have Strava. They need to be safe on our roads, and we should be thinking about what their needs are. But because they don't have the technology to participate, they're completely silenced. So I think there's some really great opportunities in terms of democratizing what transit can be and using actual data to drive it. But how that data is collected, I think is going to be really good.
Thank you.
A tecnologia nos ajudou muito nas consultas populares, digamos assim, mas nos ajudou muito a captar mais insights do planejamento cicloviário. Várias reuniões a gente fez transmissão delas. Então, tudo bem que não é todo mundo que tem pacote de dados para a internet, ou que tenha smartphone, ou que tenha um computador, mas é possível que nas reuniões a gente consiga fazer transmissão delas, disponibilizar elas depois para que outras pessoas acessem. E isso é tecnologia. Para mim, o que está no centro da questão da tecnologia nas cidades são duas coisas. A primeira é a transparência desses dados. A gente tem tido muita dificuldade para acessar os dados públicos de bilhete único, que é o bilhete do transporte coletivo, de fluxo de usuários de bicicletas compartilhadas, de usuários de patinetes. A gente tem tido muita dificuldade para acessar os dados. E sem transparência nos dados, é muito difícil você fiscalizar uma política pública. E também a questão da regulação, né? A regulamentação sobre a tecnologia, sobre novos veículos, porque é fundamental que o interesse público ele esteja acima do interesse privado da empresa. A empresa ela faz uma tecnologia para o público. Ela tem uma finalidade, ela tem fins lucrativos. A gente sabe que a inovação privada ela tem uma entrega e ela tem um público, né, um interesse. E nem sempre ele é o mesmo da necessidade real das cidades. Então, como que o Estado, a Prefeitura, o governo, ele vira o centro do planejamento dessa tecnologia? Não dá para deixar tudo na mão da iniciativa privada, que é o que tem acontecido em São Paulo. Em São Paulo, para vocês terem uma ideia, as empresas de bicicletas compartilhadas, de bike sharing e de patinetes, scooters, elas decidem onde elas vão colocar as estações. Então, naturalmente, né, uma força do mercado, elas estão nas áreas nobres. E as áreas periféricas ficam ciência e serviço. Então, para mim, passa por quem faz a tecnologia, para quem faz a tecnologia, transparência de dados e manter o poder público no centro dessa discussão.
All right. Thank you.
I just want to say something very quickly. This is our Universal Regional Transit fare card, the Presto card, in the Greater Toronto area. And up until recently, you had to get one only online and to load it with a credit card. And the benefits of having a Presto card were that you get a discount from your base cash fare, which in Toronto is quite expensive. It's $3.25. So if I use that card, I pay $3.10, right? If I use it every day, it adds up. Now, so to me, that actually widens the equity gap. So here I am, a white affluent dude with lots of credit and access to smartphones. So sure, right? I want my life even better. Thank you, government. So I'm going to order this in about 30 seconds, and I'm going to get a discount on my transit. Thank you very much. Meanwhile, the people who could really benefit most from that discount don't have the means, whether through language, through credit, through technology, or through income, to be able to access that. So what does that say? So I'm very skeptical about technology, and I see it something that could actually widen the gap instead of decrease it.
So, looking to the audience, I want to see if there are any burning questions out there. We can get a gentleman in the back with his hand up.
Hi, Steve Robin. Thank you. So I'm here in the Denver metro area. One of the biggest issues is as was seen in the maps, the cross connectivity. You have transit lines, but your vehicles can't access sometimes an hour wait between buses on the weekends and timing and all these factors. But it's there. My here in the area though, because the cross connectivity can take so long, one of the big complaints that we have is that outside of downtown, the affluent visitor area, there's no public washroom when you have to wait for transit options. And I was recently reminded on my Facebook page about being in Fiji where there were bathrooms in the bus stops. So I was curious in your perspectives how that access of drinking water, of waste management, to have not only trash but recycling, and also the washrooms available throughout the system. Thank you.
I think maybe the Canadians should answer because we don't have any of this in Brazil. It's necessary. It's extremely necessary. And in the discussions with women that we had, there is a lot of debate about that, especially in stations and terminals. That there should be washrooms, there should be in water. It's only in airports you can get a water tap with drinkable water. So I have never seen, and maybe in big terminals you're going to have a washroom that it's going to be very difficult to find it. But this is a big concern for women that we have been talking to.
Relatively few transportation hubs in Toronto even have an elevator, right, which inherently excludes people. In terms of washrooms, it is Toronto Transit Commission policy, our TPC, that's our provider of subway and bus and streetcar service, to only put washrooms in terminal stations. So at our hub, Union Station, like in downtown Denver, Lodo, I'm learning the lingo, or at the ends of the subway lines, and that's it. So obviously, biologically, we only have to go to the bathroom at the end of each subway line, right? So it's absolutely ridiculous. You know why? Because decisions are made by engineers, because it's more efficient to do that. Imagine if they actually asked their riders. Can you imagine that? So anyway, I get a little fired up about that, but it's so stupid, right? It's an easy thing, guys. It shouldn't be this hard, right?
That's very kind for being fired up, so we appreciate having you here for that. Yes, sir. There's a mic coming behind you.
Yeah, I was interested in Robin, you made the distinction between disabled environments and disabled people. And I'm just curious about maybe other panels have to say about how that would affect unemployment in the city.
I thought about one example when Robin, I also was very interested in this comment that he made, and also the understanding that maybe this is technically wrong saying this way, but all of us in some moment in our lifetime we have moments where we are more able or less able to move, right? Remember when I was pregnant twice, it was much more difficult, so I had limited mobility. And then in Brazil we got recently this data, the latest data from the census, that our elderly population increased by 80%. So as in other countries we are becoming older, our pyramid is changing a lot. And we have been doing some analysis of crossing time for pedestrians to cross the streets. And we have been analyzing the able adult man crossing time, the able woman, the elderly kids, and an adult with an elderly person with kids. And we have come to the conclusion that in the case of São Paulo, I don't have the exact numbers, but the speed that you demand for a person to cross the street is of an adult, able adult man. So I think there is a lot about it that we can, and this is the moment we get this data, it's easier to make it more visible, right? We say, well, it's virtually impossible for a person, for the majority of the population, in fact, to cross at this speed that we're demanding. So I think it is very aligned with this idea that it isn't an environment that is not enabling us, in fact. And there was recently a talk I heard from a professor from the University of Nairobi, Winnie Mutala, and she said, we were talking about children, right, and about designing, teaching children how to deal with the environment, and then how we're missing the point, in fact, how we should be, in fact, so her phrase was something like, how teaching the kids to navigate in a not enabling environment is missing the point. We should in fact be reviewing the way we make our cities so that the kids can safely navigate through that. And we have spent a lot of time trying to adjust the environment, trying to adjust the kids' behavior, and I think it's the same for other groups as well. So I don't know the numbers in Brazil, but I do believe that this concept that we all go through moments, even when we are not quote unquote defined as with disabled mobility, we always go through moments like that, and we'll arrive at that at some point. So how can we really redesign our cities? Thinking about that is crucial.
Can I just jump on that really quick second? So your point about kids being able to walk around the city safely just made me think about, so you'd like to see disabling environments as barriers that are put in, but like I think the elephant in the room to me around like, transportation equity and disabling environments is like car culture, and I think one of the biggest causes of injuries and death to kids, I think in North America, was getting hit by a car. And so the environment itself can really cause disability. And I think talking about more sustainable, safer methods of getting around your cities also addresses the fact that vehicles cause a lot of injury and disability themselves.
So this line of conversation really fits nicely into the next topic I wanted to bring to the panel and to the audience as well, and that is around land use. And some of the work that I saw of yours, Robin, specifically around the superblock, I believe in Barcelona, and how that space was sort of reclaimed and given back to people. And then some of the arguments around, was that a good idea? Aren't you going to ruin business? And is that going to be a negative? But I think I heard or read that it actually was a positive. And Alina, I think your research as well, something about a particular street that was closed down and the concerns of the business owners that they were going to lose business, but in fact, the exact opposite happened. So if anyone wants to comment on land use and how we can better provide land and opportunities to people.
Well, just quickly, as a land use planner, I'll say that we do generally a bad job because we spend literally billions of dollars that we don't have on bike lanes, well, maybe not so much in Toronto, but subways and other things. And we don't think about housing. We don't use the public land well enough. We don't leverage it. We just essentially give it away. And guess what's built? Higher end residential and commercial for the benefit of virtually a very small segment of our population. So we should not give quite literally the public land away. We should keep it and maximize it to align with public interests. And to me, it's so simple, like what I tell my students, planning is one thing and planning is politics. Right? So how do we get in there and co-opt it? How do we change the rules of the game? And we talk a good game about transit-oriented development and pedestrian-friendly development. that it's not reflected generally in our decisions, and especially on our budget lines.
Sim, em São Paulo a gente tem alguns exemplos. A Avenida Paulista é a principal avenida econômica hoje, talvez no Brasil, onde estão todas as grandes empresas, bancos. E os ciclistas, há 10 anos atrás, perceberam que uma das formas de chamar a atenção da imprensa e do governo era fechando a Avenida Paulista. E não porque a gente é importante para o governo, é porque a gente para o capital. A gente trava a circulação do dinheiro da cidade quando a gente trava a Avenida Paulista. Então, é diferente você fazer uma manifestação na Avenida da Periferia ou na Avenida Paulista. E quando o prefeito anterior fechou a Avenida Paulista para os carros e abriu para as pessoas, ele fez essa política de abrir espaços públicos para pedestres e ciclistas, ele foi muito atacado, muito atacado. A população não queria, falou que aquilo ia prejudicar hospitais, comércio, ia ser horrível para a cidade, e até hoje ela permanece, já é talvez a única política pública que permanece com muito vigor em São Paulo, porque nesses últimos 4 anos o comércio percebeu que melhorou o seu faturamento, porque especialmente aos domingos, que é quando você tem mais turistas na cidade, as pessoas querem viver ao ar livre ao final de semana e não tinha muitas opções. Então, esse exemplo da Avenida Paulista aberta vem demonstrando para a população de que muitas vezes é preciso experimentar coisas na cidade. Ainda que você não saiba se vai dar certo ou se vai dar errado, é preciso experimentar. Se der errado, a gente desfaz, mas se não tiver espaço para experiência na cidade, a gente nunca vai conseguir ter novos usos para os espaços. Eu acho que é um pouco nesse sentido.
Can I make two comments? One is just about this that Agini is talking about this political fight, I think, over space, over the space, and especially on Sundays, that there is a possibility to re-signify this space. And I think they need to show the population, to increase the population's repertoire. Does this word work? Okay. Because I think, as you said, there is this elephant in the room, which is car culture, and people just think, no, but how are we going to do without car? We don't know anymore, right? We are already, this is already too ingrained. So it's important that we test and that we show other possibilities, and that we don't rely so much on all the modeling, because I think the engineers are obsessed about modeling, and we need to model everything. And no, sometimes we need to try, and we need to activate this space differently, and it might work, and it might need some tweaks and adjustments, but let's bring different possibilities and dream differently. So this is the first comment. The second is on housing. I think the housing issue, because going back to the question on land use, if you remember the maps I showed you about Rio, the extreme west zone that was completely without access to opportunities, remember that? The west zone. This is exactly the area where in the last decade, 90% of social housing developments were delivered. 90% of low-income bracket social housing developments were put in a place where people need more than 90 minutes to access work. This is data, it's there, we mapped it all. So, we are delivering in Brazil plantations of social housing in places where there is no city, there is nothing, right? And I think this is a big issue. That's why the best mobility plan is a land use plan. I mean, how do we and just to point out, for the urban planners, you probably have already heard of Curitiba, the best example of transit-oriented planning, and you have the corridors, and you have more density along the corridors. Curitiba was done in a time when there was no integration of the housing and the transportation planning. So all those amazing buildings along the corridors, high income, so the dwellers there, they don't use bus because high income people in Brazil don't even know how to enter in a bus. That's the reality. It's very sad, but that's the reality. The buildings are full of parking space. They have like dozens of floors of parking space. And Curitiba is the place now in Brazil that has the highest motorization rate. And it's the place where the analysis of transit share, the coverage of transit per income is the worst when you compare the lower income and the highest income. In Brazil, the worst is Curitiba. So the coverage between the low income and the high income. And it is a case that we still use as a best practice, right? But I think it's a very good example of how we can, in fact, perpetuate inequality through transport policy that is not well integrated with other urban agendas like housing.
Yeah, so I say a quick point. So I think everyone kind of spoke to the importance of experimentation. And that's basically what happened in Barcelona with the super blocks as they experimented. And I got a tour of it by Alvaro Nicolas, who's a really big player in that the city of Barcelona. And he told me a bit about it, but I think what really stood out to me was the trust between the constituents and politicians. And what I see a lot, one of the biggest issues I see when it comes to transportation equity in our cities is a lack of political will. I think Claire, did you say something? Or we know what to do, but it's not about an issue of technology. You just need the politics. You said that, yeah. It's an issue of getting people to do it, but at the same time, I think that if we want to encourage experimentation, we have to allow our decision makers to make mistakes and not hang them out to dry when they do make those mistakes. And I think, with social media we're seeing happening out there in politics in general, if I was a politician, people ask me if I want to do it, I just say no, because it's terrifying. You just have people yelling at you all the time. And now you have people tweeting at you. And so I think if we want to encourage experimentation as constituents or as consumers of the services that are being provided, we have to relax a bit and allow people to make mistakes and not cancel them out if they make a bad decision.
That's great advice. Let us make mistakes. Public. Are there other questions out there, speaking of the public? I know somebody's got one. All right, so we're almost, sadly, to the end of our time. You just gave us a little bit of advice. That was going to be one of our questions. Let the politicians and let the planners make mistakes. We are human too. Let me ask you two questions, and each of you can answer, and we'll wrap this up. Question 1A is, if you had a magic wand, what would you do to solve or to tackle these issues that we've talked about today? And then the last part of that question is, this is really big, heavy, important work. So how do you recharge your batteries? What do you do to take care of yourself? So, magic wand, and how do you take care of yourself?
Let's jump in. I think magic wand is frequent free transit. Free transit is a contentious issue, but I think
free transit or TD.
Yeah,
free transit.
And the reason I say free transit is just because I think a lot of bureaucracy to get low-income passes it's a barrier to people, and I just think it's a pain in the ass having to fill those applications out. So just decrease or make it a pay-what-you-can system. I don't know. Because I think what that will do is get people out of their cars and make all the other things like cycling infrastructure and better pedestrian infrastructure more accessible. And I do focus on transit a little more, even as a cycling advocate, because I think about people with disabilities who can't participate in cycling culture. In terms of how to recharge myself, I don't know. I try to meditate. I try to come to things like this where there's a sense of solidarity, where people understand what you're talking about and you don't feel like you're crazy. You constantly gaslit if I have people who tell you that these issues aren't real issues. So yeah, I think just taking time for myself, not logging on Twitter and then coming to events like this and talking to like-minded people, or maybe even people who I don't agree with, but we're still passionate about these sorts of issues.
Great, thank you. Sean?
Magic wand, politicians would essentially have no say whatsoever in transit planning decisions. Imagine if politicians were as interventionist in transit planning as they were in sewers. No one would be able to flush the toilets because they wouldn't work because they couldn't decide what sewer line to build. Okay? In Toronto, we literally have a major transit line that we still haven't been able to build, and it has been in our official plan since 1910. Okay? So there you go. Let the planners plan. Okay? I'm really bad at self-care. I'm reading a book about meditation. Robin gave me some advice. Like Robin, going to events like this, just not feeling so alone. Sometimes I feel like I'm screaming underwater as a citizen and as a professional on these things. But I love baseball. Baseball is my refuge to play, to coach, and to also view. And I toured beautiful Coors Field yesterday, and that replenished me a bit. And it's a beautiful ballpark. So, baseball.
Difícil. Eu não sei, eu fiquei aqui pensando sobre a varinha mágica. Eu colocaria mulheres, crianças, pessoas negras nos espaços de decisão e de poder das cidades. Independente do que elas vão fazer, de onde que elas vieram, mas assim, eu sinto que precisa de mais diversidade nos espaços de decisão. Seria a minha primeira atitude. Sobre recarregar as energias, eu ando de bike muito, adoro andar de bicicleta. A bicicleta, para mim, ela se transformou nessa meditação em movimento, nesse momento que eu jogo minhas energias negativas para virar minha energia que me locomove. Então, eu gosto muito de andar de bicicleta como um meio de me recarregar. E também meu filho. Eu tenho um filho de 3 anos e não tem coisa mais impressionante do que ouvir as crianças, estar presente de verdade com a criança. Isso te faz se conectar de muitas das coisas que não importam nessa vida, porque muita coisa não importa. O que realmente importa é bem sensível aos nossos olhos. Então, filho, bicicleta e a varinha mágica seria colocar essas pessoas, mulheres, crianças, nas tomadas de decisão. E só para finalizar, é muito difícil para a gente, para nós brasileiras, estar aqui falando de mobilidade, equidade, num momento onde nossa maior floresta tropical do mundo está pegando fogo, literalmente. Então a gente está perdendo a Amazônia, a gente está perdendo povos tradicionais, indígenas sendo assassinados brutalmente, quilombos sendo desfeitos, né, população quilombola, e o país sendo vendido para países ricos, para empresas, para mineradoras, para devastação ambiental. Não tem nada hoje mais importante do que a gente acabar com o desmatamento da Amazônia. Então, às vezes eu sinto que a gente fica num debate que parece que não sai do mesmo lugar quando temos políticos que não se importam com a manutenção da vida, né, na Terra. Então, obrigada.
Okay, I want all that was mentioned. My magical wand, I agree so much with, I'm thankful for what Aline mentioned, having more diversity in the decision making, right? But my daughter once told me that I should fight for us to have 1 week a month without car. Not us, like the cities. No car, and she told me that's what I should fight for, that should be my agenda, because I said, okay, that's good, we can try to make that work. So if we had free transit and every city has a week that cars are not allowed, that could bring interesting outcomes, I think, and more people meeting in the street and slow down and having more time to exchange, because I think that's what we're missing. We are in the cities because the cities offer us so much, but we don't want what the cities have to offer, which are the encounters, with the unknown, right? And knowing how to live in a place with so many unknown people, and this is something that could be really beautiful, and that now we are afraid of people. So I think slowing down would be what I would want as a magical one. I have in the last years been very aware of this issue about how do I maintain sanity, and I think being Brazilian has really forced us to that, because it's insane what's going on there. So I have many strategies I can share after. It goes from, running, being with friends, but above all, I have 2 kids as well, and they are 8 and 11, and being with them recharges me a lot. Being with them in the street, walking, going to school, coming back from school, and just listening to them and just sharing time with them. We do a lot of puzzles. Puzzle is something really good for cleaning your mind. So I just finished a 1,000-piece puzzle this week because I was so stressed that I thought I need a puzzle, otherwise I won't cope with this week. So we did together. That was good. And something that I have done in the last year and a half to 2 years, and I highly recommend to everybody. This is no kidding. Let's get out of social media. This is really not taking us anywhere. It's not giving us more information, it's not making us better informed, it's not making us clever, it's just making us a more polarized and violent society. We need to get out of social media. I'm out, it's wonderful. It has no negative impact in my life, only positive impacts. So I have been now an advocate with all my friends, get out of social media, get out of social media. And I think this is very important for the sanity of our communities. Thank you.
All right. Well, with the exception of today, social media is probably a good idea to consider. I'd love to thank this fantastic panel. They're doing amazing work. They're changing lives for the better, and we have the privilege of hearing from them firsthand. So thank you. Thank you very much.